My aunt insulted my weight during Thanksgiving dinner, so I revealed what her husband told me. My Aunt Joy has spent $50,000 on cosmetic surgery and exercises obsessively. She survives on lettuce and judgment, constantly criticizing my appearance because I dare to exist as a size 12 woman who doesn't wear makeup. Every holiday, she gifts me diet books, gym memberships, or makeup sets. I've learned to laugh it off. But this Thanksgiving was different. I was recently diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. My whole life changed overnight. Constant monitoring, insulin shots, carb counting. I'd slipped into depression over losing my food freedom. My parents had been amazing, completely reworking our family meals to support me. They went to Joy's the day before Thanksgiving to explain my diagnosis, warning her not to make comments about my diet. They came back saying she seemed understanding. I should have known better. Thanksgiving dinner started fine. Joy talked about her latest procedure, something about her eyebrows. I wasn't listening, just grateful she wasn't targeting me. We made it through the entire meal without incident. Then came dessert. Everyone was enjoying pumpkin pie except Joy and me. She never eats sugar, and I couldn't because of my blood glucose levels. That's when she struck. All those years of eating garbage finally caught up to you, huh? I told you this would happen. Bet you regret it now. The table went silent. My mom dropped her fork. This is type 1 diabetes, my father said slowly. It's autoimmune. It has nothing to do with diet. Oh, please, Joy waved her hand. We all know obesity triggers these things. I'm not obese, I said quietly. And type 1 isn't caused by... You're not exactly thin either, she interrupted. Maybe this is your wake-up call to finally take care of yourself. I started crying. Not because she called me fat. She'd done that for years. But because she was turning my medical condition into proof that her toxic worldview was right. Get out, my father stood up. Now. Joy's husband Richard laughed. Come on, she's just being honest. Someone needs to tell the truth around here. That's when I snapped. Speaking of truth, Richard, does Joy know about Jessica? The room froze. Richard's smirk vanished. What about Jessica? Joy asked, her voice sharp. Jessica was Richard's personal trainer. I'd seen them at a hotel 3 months ago when I was attending a conference. They definitely weren't training. I'd kept quiet because it wasn't my business, but now... Nothing, Richard said quickly. Let's go, Pat. No, what about Jessica? Joy stood up, her surgically enhanced face struggling to show emotion. What does she know? Your 4-year-old told me she saw Daddy kissing not Mommy, I said. But I'm sure that's just a misunderstanding, right, Richard? Joy turned to her husband. Is this true? She's lying. She's just upset about... I have photos, I said quietly. From the Marriott. September 15th, 2:34 p.m. I didn't actually have photos, but Richard didn't know that. His face went gray. Joy grabbed her wine and threw it in his face. In front of our child? Pat, baby, let me explain. We're leaving, separately. She grabbed her purse. Richard, don't come home. They both left, Joy slamming the door so hard the windows shook. Richard peeled out of the driveway behind her. The dining room was silent until my little cousin Ara asked, Why is everyone mad? That night, Joy called my mom sobbing. Richard had admitted to everything. Not just Jessica, but 3 other women. He'd been serial cheating for years, using Joy's gym schedule to time his affairs. She kept apologizing, Mom told me. Said she attacks others because she hates herself. The surgeries, the dieting, it was all to keep Richard interested, but he was cheating the whole time. I felt terrible. I'd weaponized her husband's affair in a moment of anger. Even if she'd been cruel, destroying her marriage wasn't right. The next morning, Joy texted me. Found Richard's laptop. Need your help. Please come alone. I should have said no. Should have brought someone. But guilt made me stupid. I drove to her house. The door was open. I found Joy in the living room, surrounded by printed emails, photos, bank statements. Look at this, she said, her voice strange. Look what I found. I leaned in to look at the papers. They weren't about affairs. They were medical records. Richard's medical records. From a clinic I didn't recognize. He's been poisoning me, Joy whispered. Small doses of insulin in my protein shakes. For months. My blood went cold. Joy, we need to call the police. That's why I kept losing weight. Why I was always shaking. He wanted me weak. She looked up at me with hollow eyes. He has a life insurance policy. $2 million. A door slammed somewhere in the house. Joy, Richard's voice called out. We need to talk. Joy grabbed my arm. He's not supposed to be here. I changed the locks. Heavy footsteps on the stairs. "He still has a key," she whispered, pulling me toward the back door. "Run!" I yanked the deadbolt back and shoved the door open with my shoulder. Joy stumbled out behind me, still gripping that folder like her life depended on it. My glucose monitor kept beeping in my pocket, but I couldn't think about that right now. We ran across her perfect grass, the kind that probably cost more to maintain than my car payment. Richard's voice got louder behind us, yelling something I couldn't make out. Joy was breathing in these short, panicked gasps next to me. I fumbled for my keys, my hands shaking so bad I dropped them on the sidewalk. Joy bent down and grabbed them before I could. She unlocked my car and we both threw ourselves inside. I started the engine and pulled away from the curb just as Richard appeared in the doorway. He looked wild, his hair messed up and his face red. I watched him in the rearview mirror as we turned the corner. Joy wouldn't stop hyperventilating in the passenger seat. She kept saying the same thing over and over. Her voice came out all breathy and broken. I gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles went white. My own breathing wasn't much better. The folder crinkled against her chest every time she moved. I took the turns too fast, not caring about the speed limit. My phone buzzed in the cup holder, but I ignored it. The whole drive felt like it took forever and no time at all. I kept checking the mirror to see if Richard was following us. Every car behind me looked suspicious. Joy's breathing got worse and I thought she might pass out. I reached over and grabbed her hand. It was ice cold and clammy. We pulled into my parents' driveway and I hit the brakes too hard. We both jerked forward against our seatbelts. I practically dragged Joy up the front steps. My mom opened the door before I could knock, probably because she heard the car. Her eyes went huge when she saw us. Joy was still clutching that folder and her whole body was shaking. My dad came around the corner from the kitchen and his face went pale. I tried to explain, but the words came out all jumbled. Joy pushed past me into the house and my mom caught her before she fell. My dad was already pulling out his phone. He dialed 911 while my mom wrapped this big blanket around Joy's shoulders. Joy finally let go of everything she'd been holding in. She sobbed so hard her whole body shook. She kept trying to tell my parents what Richard had done, but she could barely get the words out. My dad stayed on the phone with the dispatcher while my mom held Joy. I stood there feeling useless, watching my aunt fall apart. She kept saying Richard had been poisoning her for months, that he wanted the insurance money, that he'd been planning to kill her. The police showed up fast. 2 officers in uniform knocked on the door and my dad let them in. They separated us right away. One took Joy into the living room while the other stayed with me in the kitchen. I explained everything from the beginning. How Joy had texted me about Richard's laptop, how I'd found her surrounded by all those papers, the medical records that showed what he'd been doing. The officer wrote everything down in this little notebook. He asked me specific questions about Richard showing up at the house, what time I'd arrived, whether Richard had threatened us directly. I told him about Richard's voice calling out from somewhere in the house, how Joy said he wasn't supposed to be there, how we ran. The officer's face stayed neutral, but I could tell he was taking it seriously. He asked if I had the medical records. I pointed toward the living room where Joy still had the folder. The other officer was going through it with her. The officers talked to each other in low voices near the front door. One of them got on his radio and called for another unit to go to Joy's house. They wanted to check if Richard was still there. My mom made tea that nobody drank. Joy sat on the couch with the blanket pulled tight around her shoulders. Her face looked gray and hollow. The officers took photos of the papers from the folder with their phones. They asked Joy more questions about her symptoms, when the weight loss started, the shaking, the confusion. Joy answered everything in this flat, tired voice. She said it had been going on for at least 6 months, maybe longer. She'd thought she was just stressed about Richard's affairs, about trying to keep him happy. She never imagined he was actually trying to kill her. One of the officers asked about the life insurance policy. Joy told them it was for $2 million. Richard had taken it out about a year and a half ago, said it was for their daughter's future. The radio on one officer's belt crackled. The unit at Joy's house reported back. Richard's car was gone from the driveway. The front door was still unlocked. They'd gone inside and found the house empty. Richard's laptop was still sitting on the coffee table with all those files pulled up on the screen. The officers told us Richard had probably left right after we did. One of them asked if we knew where he might go. Joy shook her head. She said he had friends from work, but she didn't know their addresses. The officer asked about Richard's parents. Joy gave them the address. The officer said they'd send someone to check there too. They told Joy she'd done the right thing by leaving when she did, that she needed to stay somewhere safe until they located Richard. My dad said Joy could stay with us as long as she needed. The officer said someone from the detective unit would be in touch tomorrow morning. They took all our contact information and left copies of their report. Detective Stiles showed up the next morning around 9. He was maybe 50 with gray hair and these kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. He introduced himself and shook everyone's hands. My mom made coffee and we all sat around the dining room table. Joy looked better after sleeping, but still exhausted. Detective Stiles opened a folder and pulled out some papers. He said he'd reviewed the patrol officer's reports and the photos of the medical records. He wanted to hear everything directly from Joy. She went through it all again. How she'd been feeling sick for months. The unexplained weight loss even though she was eating. The constant shaking and weakness. The confusion that would come over her for no reason. She'd blamed it on stress and maybe early menopause. Detective Stiles listened without interrupting. He took notes in this neat handwriting. When Joy finished, he asked if she'd been to a doctor about these symptoms. Joy said no. She'd been too embarrassed to admit something was wrong. Detective Stiles explained that insulin poisoning was hard to prove. The insulin breaks down in the body pretty fast. But Joy's symptoms matched exactly what you'd expect from someone being given insulin who didn't need it. Combined with the medical records from Richard's laptop and the life insurance policy, there was enough to investigate seriously. He asked Joy detailed questions about her protein shakes, where she kept them, whether Richard had access. Joy said she made them every morning and kept the powder in the kitchen cabinet. Richard was always home when she made them. She'd leave the shake in the fridge and drink it after her workout. Richard could have easily added something while she was at the gym. Detective Stiles nodded and wrote more notes. He said they'd need to get Joy to the hospital right away. They needed blood work and a full medical workup to document everything for the case. He made some calls on his phone and arranged for Joy to go to the hospital within the hour. We drove Joy to the emergency room. Detective Stiles met us there with another officer. They'd called ahead and the hospital staff was expecting us. A nurse took Joy back right away. The doctor who examined her was young, but seemed to know what she was doing. She ordered a whole bunch of tests: blood sugar levels, insulin levels, liver and kidney function. They needed to document Joy's current condition and see if there was any evidence of the poisoning still in her system. Joy had to stay in this little exam room for hours while they ran everything. I sat with her for most of it. She was quiet, just staring at the wall. My mom went to get Joy some clothes and toiletries from her house since the police had finished processing it. Detective Stiles stayed at the hospital, talking to the doctors and making more calls. Finally, around dinner time, the doctor came back with results. Joy's blood sugar was dangerously low. Her insulin levels were all wrong for someone who wasn't diabetic. The patterns matched exactly what they'd expect from external insulin being given over months. The doctor said Joy was lucky to be alive. They admitted Joy to a regular hospital room for observation. She needed to stay at least overnight, maybe longer. They wanted to monitor her blood sugar and make sure she stabilized. They also needed to run more tests to see if there was any permanent damage to her organs from months of poisoning. Joy looked so small in that hospital bed. All the fight had gone out of her. She just lay there with her eyes closed while nurses came in and out checking her vital signs. My dad brought Ara to visit for a little while. Joy tried to smile for her daughter, but Ara could tell something was wrong. She kept asking why Mommy was in the hospital. Joy told her she'd been sick, but the doctors were helping her feel better. Ara climbed up on the bed and hugged her mom. Joy held her tight and I saw tears running down her face. My mom took Ara home after about an hour. Detective Stiles came by the room before he left for the night. He told Joy they were actively looking for Richard. They'd put out an alert to surrounding police departments. He said to try to rest and that he'd be back tomorrow with more questions. I spent the next morning sitting in the uncomfortable hospital chair next to Joy's bed. She looked small under the white sheets, nothing like the put-together woman who used to terrorize family dinners. Her face was bare of makeup for maybe the first time I'd ever seen her. The machines beeped softly, tracking her blood sugar and heart rate. She stared at the ceiling for a long time before she started talking. She told me about meeting Richard in college, how charming he'd been, how he made her feel special. They got married young and she thought everything was perfect. Then she found texts from another woman when Ara was just 3 months old. Joy confronted him and Richard cried, said it was a mistake, that he loved his family. She believed him because she wanted to believe him. But it kept happening. Different women, same excuses. Joy started obsessing over her appearance, convinced she just needed to be prettier, thinner, more perfect. That's when the surgeries started. First just Botox, then her nose, then her breasts, then procedures I'd never even heard of. She spent thousands trying to become someone Richard wouldn't cheat on. But he kept cheating anyway. She told me all this in a flat voice, like she was reading someone else's story. The plastic surgery became an addiction, she said. Every time she looked in the mirror, she saw more flaws to fix. The dieting got worse too. She was eating maybe 800 calories a day, running 6 miles every morning, doing 2-hour gym sessions. Her trainer told her it was too much, but she didn't care. She had to be perfect. And the whole time, Richard was meeting Jessica at hotels, taking other women to restaurants, using Joy's gym schedule to plan his affairs. Joy turned to look at me then. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying. She apologized for every cruel comment she'd ever made about my weight, my face, my clothes, everything. She said watching me exist comfortably in my body made her hate herself more. I seemed happy and confident at a size 12 while she was miserable and starving at a size 2. She took out all her self-hatred on me because it was easier than facing how much she despised herself. She said the diabetes comment at Thanksgiving was the worst thing she'd ever done. She knew it was a medical condition, and she used it to hurt me anyway. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to tell her it was okay, but it really wasn't. She'd spent years making me feel bad about myself. But seeing her in that hospital bed, realizing her husband had been literally poisoning her, I couldn't stay angry. I told her I accepted her apology, but we had a long way to go. She nodded and said she understood. My mom brought Era to visit that afternoon. The little girl ran into the room clutching a stuffed bear, excited to see her mommy. Joy's face crumpled when Ara climbed onto the bed. She held her daughter tight and started crying again. Ara patted her mom's face and asked why she was sad. Joy tried to explain that she'd been sick but was getting better. Ara nodded seriously and said Daddy had been helping Mommy with her medicine. Joy went very still. She asked Ara what she meant about Daddy and medicine. Ara said she saw Daddy put medicine in Mommy's special drinks lots of times. He told her it was vitamins to help Mommy get strong like Ara. Joy's hands were shaking as she asked Ara to show her how Daddy did it. Ara made a motion like pushing down on something with her thumb, just like using a syringe. My mom and I exchanged looks. This was evidence. A 4-year-old had witnessed Richard poisoning Joy and thought she was watching her daddy help her mommy. Joy hugged Ara again and told her she was such a good girl for remembering. Then she asked my mom to take Ara to get ice cream from the cafeteria. She needed a minute alone. Detective Stiles came by later that evening with a woman he introduced as a child psychologist. They needed to interview Ara but wanted to do it properly, so her testimony would hold up in court. My mom brought Ara back from the cafeteria, and the psychologist explained they wanted to play a game where Ara told them about helping Mommy and Daddy. They set up in a small conference room with toys and art supplies. Detective Stiles and the psychologist were so gentle with Ara, letting her draw pictures while she talked. She drew a picture of Daddy with a pointy thing, and Mommy's special cup. She said Daddy told her it was their secret to help Mommy. The psychologist asked Ara to show them how Daddy used the pointy thing. Ara picked up a marker and demonstrated pushing down on the top, exactly like someone would use a needle to inject something. She said Daddy did it when Mommy was at the gym or taking a shower. He'd open the fridge, take out Mommy's protein shake, do the medicine thing, and put it back. Ara thought she was being a good helper by keeping the secret. Detective Stiles recorded everything while the psychologist took notes. The whole interview took about 40 minutes and Ara never seemed upset or scared. She just thought she was telling a story about helping her parents. The next morning, Detective Stiles got a call from a lawyer named Bo Carver. He said he was representing Richard and that his client wanted to turn himself in. Detective Stiles arranged for Richard to surrender at the police station rather than sending officers to arrest him. They set it up for 10 in the morning. I went with Joy to the station even though we had to wait in a different area. Joy needed to see this happen. She needed to watch Richard face consequences. We sat in hard plastic chairs in a waiting room for over an hour. Then Detective Stiles came out and said Richard had arrived. Joy gripped my hand so hard it hurt. Through a window in the door, we could see Richard walking in with his lawyer. He looked terrible. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his hair was a mess, and he had dark circles under his eyes. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in 3 days. The confident man who'd laughed at Joy's pain at Thanksgiving was gone. This Richard looked scared and defeated. Detective Stiles led him into an interview room and we couldn't see anymore. Joy let out a breath she'd been holding and said she was ready to go back to the hospital. Richard's interview lasted 3 hours. Detective Stiles told us later that Richard initially tried to claim he was just having affairs. He said the insulin was Joy's own medication that her doctor had prescribed for pre-diabetes. He acted like Joy was making everything up because she was angry about the cheating. But then Detective Stiles brought up Ara's testimony. He described how Ara had demonstrated the injection motion, how she'd talked about keeping Daddy's secret. Richard's whole story started falling apart. He got defensive, then angry, then quiet. His lawyer kept telling him not to answer questions, but Richard kept talking anyway. He admitted buying insulin online from a pharmacy in Mexico. He admitted putting it in Joy's protein shakes, but he claimed he was just trying to help her lose weight faster because she was always complaining about her body. Detective Stiles pointed out that insulin doesn't make people lose weight in healthy doses. It causes dangerous drops in blood sugar that can lead to seizures, coma, and death. He showed Richard the life insurance policy documents. $2 million with Joy as the insured. Richard had no good explanation for that. The district attorney charged Richard with attempted murder the next day. The bail hearing happened fast because Richard was considered a flight risk. His lawyer argued that Richard was a respected businessman with ties to the community who would never flee. The prosecutor pointed out that Richard had already demonstrated consciousness of guilt by hiding when police came to his house. She talked about the danger he posed to Joy and potentially to Ara. The judge set bail at $500,000. I thought that meant Richard would stay in jail, but 2 days later, Detective Stiles called to say Richard's parents had mortgaged their house to bail him out. Joy was horrified. She couldn't believe his parents would do that after what he'd done. She was terrified knowing Richard was out there somewhere, not locked up safely in jail. My mom's friend recommended a divorce attorney named Victoria Redmond. Joy called her from the hospital, and Victoria came to meet with her that same day. Victoria was probably in her 50s with short gray hair and sharp eyes. She listened to everything Joy told her without interrupting. Then she said they were filing for divorce immediately, asking for full custody of Ara and getting a restraining order. She said the criminal case would take months or even years, but they could protect Joy and Ara right now through family court. Victoria had papers drawn up within 2 days. She filed for divorce citing adultery and abuse. She requested full legal and physical custody of Ara with only supervised visitation for Richard. And she got a temporary restraining order that said Richard had to stay at least 500 feet away from Joy and Ara at all times. Victoria told Joy this was just the beginning, but it was a strong start. Joy was discharged from the hospital after 5 days. The doctors said her blood sugar had stabilized and she was out of immediate danger, but she was still weak and shaky. She couldn't go back to her house because it was part of a crime scene, and also because Richard knew where it was. Victoria had arranged a secure apartment in a different part of town. It was a small 2-bedroom place in a building with security cameras and a locked entrance. My parents helped Joy move some clothes and Ara's toys from the house. I offered to stay with them for a while. Joy was too weak to manage everything alone, and Ara needed stability. Plus, I felt guilty. I kept thinking that if I hadn't exposed the affair at Thanksgiving, maybe none of this would have happened. Maybe Richard wouldn't have panicked and come after Joy. Joy told me that was stupid, that Richard had been poisoning her for months before Thanksgiving, but I couldn't shake the feeling. So I packed a bag and moved into the apartment's 2nd bedroom. My therapist, Jasmine Mahoney, helped me work through everything in our next session. I'd been seeing her since my diabetes diagnosis because I was struggling with the lifestyle changes and depression. Now we had a whole new crisis to unpack. I told her I felt responsible for Joy being in danger. If I'd kept my mouth shut about Richard's affair, Joy wouldn't have confronted him. He wouldn't have felt cornered, and maybe he wouldn't have tried to finish what he started with the poisoning. Jasmine listened and then asked me if I thought Richard had stopped poisoning Joy before Thanksgiving. I said no. The medical records showed it had been going on for months. Jasmine pointed out that Richard's actions were his own choices. He chose to cheat. He chose to poison his wife. He chose to take out a life insurance policy. None of that was because of what I said at dinner. Richard was already trying to kill Joy. All I did was expose part of his behavior. The rest of his crimes were entirely on him. She said I needed to stop taking responsibility for someone else's attempted murder. That helped a little, but I still felt guilty about the whole mess. Living with Joy and Ara in the secure apartment felt strange at first. The place was small and plain, nothing like Joy's old house with its perfect furniture and expensive art. But it was safe. That mattered more than anything else. Joy had her own bedroom and Ara had the second one. I slept on the pull-out couch in the living room. My parents brought over some of my clothes and my diabetes supplies. I set up my testing kit and insulin on the coffee table so I could monitor my blood sugar throughout the day. Joy started seeing a therapist 3 days after getting out of the hospital. Victoria had recommended someone who worked with abuse victims. The therapist's office was in a medical building downtown. I drove Joy to her first appointment because she was still too shaky to drive herself. She went in alone while I waited in the car. When she came out 40 minutes later, her eyes were red, but she seemed calmer. She didn't say much on the drive back, just thanked me for taking her. Over the next few weeks, Joy went to therapy twice a week. Slowly, she started opening up to me about what she was learning. One night after Ara went to bed, Joy sat down on the couch next to me. She looked tired but more present than I'd seen her in years. She told me the therapist was helping her understand why she'd been so obsessed with her appearance. It wasn't really about being beautiful. It was about control, about trying to make herself perfect enough that Richard would stop cheating. She said she'd known about the affairs for years. Not the specific women, but she knew something was wrong. She could smell perfume that wasn't hers. Found receipts for restaurants they'd never been to together. But instead of confronting him, she got more surgeries, lost more weight, became more desperate. She thought if she could just become perfect enough, he would love her the way she needed him to. Her voice broke when she said that. I didn't know what to say. Part of me was still angry about all the years she'd criticized me. But seeing her like this, broken and honest, made it harder to hold on to that anger. Victoria's assistant Michaela started helping Joy go through Richard's financial records. Michaela was younger than Victoria, maybe in her late 20s, with short dark hair and serious eyes. She came to the apartment with a laptop and boxes of files. Joy had managed to get copies of Richard's bank statements and credit card records before the police took his laptop as evidence. Michaela spread everything out on the dining table and started making notes. I watched from the couch while Ara played with her toys in her room. Michaela worked fast, her fingers moving across the laptop keyboard as she cross-referenced different documents. After about 2 hours, she called Victoria. I could only hear Michaela's side of the conversation, but her voice sounded excited. When she hung up, she turned to Joy with a grim smile. She'd found offshore accounts. 3 of them. Richard had been moving money out of their joint accounts for the past 2 years, small amounts at a time so Joy wouldn't notice. The accounts were in the Cayman Islands. Michaela estimated he'd hidden about $400,000. Joy's face went pale. That was money from her inheritance, from her parents who died 5 years ago. Richard had been stealing from her while planning to kill her. Michaela kept digging through the records. She found the life insurance policy Richard had taken out. He'd purchased it 18 months ago. $2 million with Joy as the insured and himself as the beneficiary. The timing matched up with when Joy's symptoms started, when the unexplained weight loss and shaking began. Richard had planned this carefully. He'd hidden money so Joy couldn't access it after the divorce she didn't know was coming. Then he'd started poisoning her slowly, making it look like a medical condition. If she'd died, he would have gotten the insurance money and kept the hidden accounts. Joy started crying. Not loud sobbing, just quiet tears running down her face. Michaela packed up her files and told Joy that Victoria would use this information in the divorce case. They could freeze the offshore accounts and get that money back. It would help pay for legal fees and set Joy up after everything was settled. The forensic specialist came to collect Joy's protein shake containers a week later. Detective Stiles had arranged it. The specialist was a woman in her 50s wearing gloves and carrying evidence bags. Joy showed her where she kept the protein powder and the blender she used every morning. The specialist carefully bagged everything, labeling each item with dates and case numbers. She explained that they would test for insulin residue and check for fingerprints. The results would take about 2 weeks. Detective Stiles called Joy 12 days later. I was there when she answered. I watched her face change as she listened. When she hung up, she looked at me with something like relief mixed with horror. They'd found Richard's fingerprints all over the protein powder container and the blender. More importantly, they'd found traces of insulin in the powder itself, and residue in the blender that matched the insulin Richard had been purchasing. The specialist said the evidence was strong. Richard's fingerprints proved he'd handled the containers. The insulin residue proved it had been added to Joy's drinks. Combined with Joy's medical records showing dangerous insulin levels, it made Richard's defense almost impossible. This wasn't circumstantial anymore. It was physical proof that Richard had poisoned his wife. Detective Stiles told Joy this evidence would likely push Richard toward a plea deal. His lawyer would see how bad this looked for trial. Joy asked what that meant. Detective Stiles explained that Richard might plead guilty to a lesser charge to avoid trial and a longer sentence. Joy didn't know how to feel about that. Part of her wanted him to face a jury and hear every detail of what he'd done. But another part just wanted it over. Richard started trying to contact Joy 2 weeks after his arrest. He couldn't call or text because of the restraining order. Instead, he used mutual friends. First, it was Joy's former yoga instructor. She called Joy saying Richard had reached out asking her to pass along a message. He wanted to apologize and explain everything. The instructor said Richard sounded genuinely sorry, and maybe Joy should hear him out. Joy told her no and hung up. Then Richard's brother called. He said Richard was devastated and just wanted a chance to talk to Joy, to make her understand it wasn't what it looked like. Joy hung up on him too. The third attempt came through a neighbor from their old street. The neighbor showed up at the apartment building somehow. The security guard called up asking if Joy wanted to see her. Joy said no. Victoria heard about these contact attempts during their next meeting. Her face went hard. She pulled out her phone and called someone while Joy and I sat there. When she hung up, she told Joy she'd reported the violations to both Detective Stiles and the family court judge. Each attempt to contact Joy through third parties violated the restraining order. Victoria said Richard's lawyer would get a warning first. If it happened again, Richard could face additional charges and his bail could be revoked. The contact attempts stopped after that. Joy's health started improving slowly over the next 3 weeks. The doctors had said it would take time for the insulin to fully leave her system and for her body to recover from months of induced low blood sugar. At first, the changes were small. She had more energy in the mornings. The constant shaking in her hands got better. Her thinking felt clearer, less foggy. She started gaining back some of the weight she'd lost. Not a lot, maybe 5 or 6 pounds, but enough that her face didn't look so hollow anymore. She could climb the stairs to the apartment without getting winded, could focus on reading to Ara at bedtime without losing her place, but the doctors warned her during a follow-up appointment that some damage might be permanent. Months of hypoglycemia could affect her metabolism long-term. She might struggle with blood sugar regulation even without someone poisoning her. Might have increased risk for diabetes herself. Cognitive effects like memory problems or difficulty concentrating could linger. Joy took the news quietly. She'd been poisoned by her husband for over a year. Some permanent damage seemed like a small price for surviving. Ara started having problems about a month after Richard's arrest. At first, it was small things. Nightmares that woke her up crying, not wanting to go to preschool, clinging to Joy whenever someone knocked on the door. Then it got worse. Ara stopped talking as much. She'd always been a chatty kid, constantly asking questions and telling stories. Now she went quiet for hours. She stopped playing with her favorite toys, started wetting the bed even though she'd been potty trained for over a year. Joy tried talking to her, but Ara just shook her head and wouldn't answer. One night, Ara woke up screaming. Joy and I both ran to her room. Ara was sitting up in bed, eyes wide, crying that the police were coming to take Mommy away. Joy held her and promised she wasn't going anywhere. But Ara couldn't calm down. She kept saying she saw Daddy put medicine in Mommy's drink. Kept asking if Mommy was going to die like the goldfish did. Joy called Ara's pediatrician the next morning. The doctor recommended a child psychologist who worked with kids who'd witnessed domestic violence. Joy made an appointment for that week. The psychologist used play therapy. She had Ara draw pictures and play with dolls while they talked. Ara drew a picture of a man with a needle. Drew a woman lying in a hospital bed. Drew herself hiding under a table. The psychologist told Joy that Ara had witnessed more than anyone realized. Kids see everything. Ara had watched her father poisoning her mother, had seen her mother getting sicker, had watched the police arrest her father. That was trauma that needed professional help to process. The psychologist recommended twice-weekly sessions and gave Joy strategies for helping Ara feel safe at home. I was making breakfast one morning when everything went wrong with my blood sugar. I'd been so focused on taking care of Joy and Ara that I wasn't paying enough attention to my own diabetes management. My eating schedule was off. I'd skip meals or eat at weird times. I wasn't testing my blood sugar as often as I should. That morning, I'd woken up late and rushed to make Ara's breakfast. I felt a little dizzy but ignored it. Started scrambling eggs for Ara while Joy got dressed for a therapy appointment. The dizziness got worse. My hands started shaking. I grabbed the counter to steady myself, but my legs felt weak. I tried to call out to Joy, but my voice came out wrong. Slurred. The kitchen started spinning. I heard the pan hit the floor. Heard Ara start crying. Then I was on the ground and Joy was kneeling next to me. Her voice sounded far away even though I could see her face right in front of mine. She was checking my blood sugar with my monitor. I heard her say something about 32, which didn't make sense because blood sugar shouldn't be that low. She ran to the kitchen and came back with orange juice. Held my head up and made me drink it. The juice was too sweet and I wanted to push it away, but she kept making me drink. She had her phone out. Was calling someone. I heard her say ambulance and diabetes emergency and please hurry. Ara was still crying somewhere. Joy kept talking to me, telling me to stay awake, telling me help was coming. The orange juice started working a little. The spinning slowed down. But I still felt terrible. Weak and shaky and scared. The paramedics arrived maybe 10 minutes later. They checked my blood sugar again. It was up to 53 from the juice, but still dangerously low. They started an IV and gave me glucose through the line. Asked Joy what happened. She explained that I'd been caring for her and probably wasn't managing my own diabetes properly. One of the paramedics asked if I wanted to go to the hospital. I said no. They said I should really get checked out, but they couldn't force me. They stayed until my blood sugar came up to 90 and I could sit up without feeling like I'd pass out. Before they left, one of them pulled Joy aside. I heard him tell her that I needed to take better care of myself. That diabetes wasn't something you could ignore. That next time I might not wake up. Joy's face looked scared. The same kind of scared it had looked when she thought Richard was poisoning her. After the paramedics left, I lay on the couch feeling shaky and stupid. Joy sat in the chair across from me with Ara on her lap. We didn't talk for a while. Ara had finally stopped crying but kept looking at me with worried eyes. Joy called my mom. I could hear Mom's voice getting loud through the phone. Joy just said yes and okay, and I understand over and over. When she hung up, she told me Mom and Dad were coming over. They arrived an hour later. Mom took one look at me and started crying. Dad's face was tight with worry. They'd been so focused on helping Joy through her crisis that they hadn't realized I was falling apart too. Mom said I was moving back home. I tried to argue, but she shut me down. She said I'd almost died that morning from neglecting my diabetes, that I couldn't take care of Joy if I couldn't take care of myself. Dad said they'd hire someone to help Joy and Ara, a professional caregiver who could manage things properly. I felt guilty leaving Joy, but I also felt relieved. I was exhausted. The stress of everything had been too much, and I'd let my health fall apart. Joy hugged me before I left, thanked me for everything I'd done, told me to go home and get better. My parents packed up my stuff and drove me to their house. Mom made me test my blood sugar and eat a proper meal. Then she put me to bed like I was a kid again. I slept for 14 hours straight. 2 days later, Joy came over to my parents' house. Mom had hired a caregiver named Ruth who was staying at the apartment with Joy and Ara during the day. Joy looked better than she had in weeks. Less exhausted. More like herself. We sat in my childhood bedroom and talked. Really talked. Maybe for the first time in our lives. Joy started by apologizing again. Not just for the Thanksgiving comments, but for years of cruelty. She said she understood if I couldn't forgive her right away. That she'd spent our whole relationship tearing me down to make herself feel better. That she'd projected all her self-hatred onto me because I seemed comfortable in my own skin, in a way she'd never been. I told her I appreciated the apology, but I needed time. That years of hurt didn't go away because she'd finally realized she was wrong. She nodded and said she understood. Said she didn't expect instant forgiveness. But she wanted to try being the aunt I deserved. Wanted to build something real between us instead of the toxic dynamic we'd had before. I asked her what that would look like. She said she didn't know exactly. Maybe we could start small. Coffee once a week. Phone calls that weren't about crisis. Getting to know each other as actual people instead of whatever roles we'd been playing. I said I was willing to try. That I wanted to believe she could change. But I needed her to understand that trust would take time to rebuild. She agreed. Said she was in therapy twice a week working on herself, that she was learning to separate her worth from her appearance and Richard's approval. That she wanted Ara to grow up seeing a mother who valued herself for more than how she looked. We talked for over an hour. It wasn't comfortable or easy, but it felt honest in a way our relationship never had before. The preliminary hearing got scheduled for 6 weeks after Richard's arrest. Victoria explained that this wasn't the trial. Just a hearing where the judge would decide if there was enough evidence to move forward with the charges. But I still had to testify. Had to tell the court what I'd seen that day at Joy's house. Victoria prepared me for what to expect. Told me Richard's lawyer would try to make me seem unreliable or biased, that I should just tell the truth calmly and not let him rattle me. The hearing was at the county courthouse downtown. My parents came with me. Joy was already there with Victoria. We had to wait in a witness room until it was my turn. I could hear voices from the courtroom but couldn't make out words. My stomach felt sick. I kept checking my blood sugar even though it was fine. After about an hour, a bailiff came to get me. Walked me into the courtroom. It was smaller than I'd expected. Wood paneling and fluorescent lights. Richard sat at a table with his lawyer. He looked terrible. He'd lost weight and his face was gray. His hair was messy. He was wearing a suit, but it hung loose on him. When I walked in, he looked up. Our eyes met for just a second. I looked away fast and focused on the witness stand. The bailiff had me swear to tell the truth. Then Victoria started asking questions. She asked me to describe what happened the day I went to Joy's house. I told her about the text message, about finding Joy surrounded by papers, about her showing me the medical records, about hearing Richard come into the house, about running out the back door. Victoria asked if I'd felt Joy was in danger. I said yes. That Joy had been terrified, that we'd run because she thought Richard would hurt her. Then Richard's lawyer got his turn. He was an older man with gray hair and an expensive suit. He asked me if I'd been the one who exposed Richard's affair at Thanksgiving. I said yes. He asked if I'd been angry at Richard. I said I'd been angry at both of them for how they treated me. He asked if maybe I'd helped Joy fabricate evidence because I wanted revenge. I said no. That I'd just found Joy with papers she'd printed from Richard's laptop. That I didn't make anything up. He asked how I knew the papers were real. I said I didn't know for sure, but Joy's medical records backed up what they showed. He kept pushing, trying to make it sound like Joy and I had planned everything together. But I stuck to what actually happened. After about 20 minutes, the judge told him that was enough. I was excused. I walked past Richard's table on my way out. He was staring at his hands, wouldn't look at me. I went back to the witness room where my parents were waiting. Mom hugged me and said I did great. But I felt sick. Seeing Richard in person, seeing how broken he looked, made everything feel more real and more horrible at the same time. Ara's video testimony played on a screen in the courtroom. She sat in a child-friendly interview room with a therapist. her small voice describing how Daddy put medicine in Mommy's special drinks with a pointy thing. She demonstrated with her hands how Richard would hold the syringe, how he'd tell her it was their secret to help Mommy get strong. The courtroom was dead quiet except for Ara's voice. I watched Richard slump lower in his chair as his daughter's words filled the room. His lawyer kept objecting, but the judge overruled every attempt to stop the video. When Ara said she thought Daddy was being nice to Mommy, Joy started crying silently beside me. The video ended, and Richard's lawyer stood up to argue that Joy had coached Ara, that a vindictive wife fabricated everything to destroy him in the divorce. He pointed at Joy and called her manipulative, desperate, willing to use her own child as a weapon. The prosecutor presented the medical evidence next. Doctors testified about Joy's insulin levels, the timeline of her symptoms, the physical evidence of injection sites on the protein shake bottles. Richard's fingerprints were all over those bottles. The judge listened to everything without showing much emotion on his face. Then he asked Richard's lawyer if he had any actual evidence that Joy fabricated the medical records or coached their daughter. The lawyer stammered about reasonable doubt and vindictive spouses but couldn't produce anything concrete. The judge ruled there was sufficient evidence to proceed to trial. He denied Richard's request for lower bail, stating the defendant posed a clear danger to the victim. Richard's parents stood up in the back row, his mother shouting that Joy was destroying their son with lies. The bailiff had to escort them out while they glared at Joy and me like we'd personally ruined their family. The custody hearing happened 2 days later. Victoria presented evidence of Richard's attempted murder charges, the danger he posed to Ara and Joy's stable living situation with my parents. Richard's lawyer argued that Joy was unstable, that she'd involved their daughter in adult conflicts, that Richard's parents could provide better care. Richard's parents sat in the front row nodding along with every word. Victoria called me as a witness to describe Joy's condition when I found her, how scared she was, how she'd protected Ara by running. The judge asked Richard's parents if they believed their son had poisoned his wife. Richard's mother said no, that Joy was lying for money and custody. The judge's expression hardened. He awarded Joy temporary full custody with supervised visitation for Richard, pending the criminal trial outcome. Richard could see Ara 2 hours per week with a social worker present. Richard's parents tried to argue, his father standing up to say they had rights as grandparents. The judge shut that down fast, saying Ara's safety was the only priority given the serious criminal charges. Joy cried with relief when we left the courthouse. Victoria put her hand on Joy's shoulder and told her she'd done the right thing protecting Ara. Joy put her house on the market the next week. She couldn't afford the mortgage without Richard's income, and the legal fees were piling up fast. She sold most of her furniture, her expensive clothes, all the things Richard had bought to show off their wealth. I helped her pack up Ara's room, wrapping her toys and books carefully while Joy sorted through years of accumulated stuff. She threw away her diet books, her exercise journals, all the things that had consumed her life trying to be perfect for a man who was poisoning her. The house sold in 3 weeks to a young couple with a baby. Joy took the money and paid Victoria's retainer, covered the forensic specialist's fees, and put the rest toward starting over. She found a small 2-bedroom apartment near my parents' house. It had plain white walls and basic appliances, nothing fancy. But it was hers, paid for with her own money, and Richard had never set foot in it. My mom and I helped her move in with the few things she'd kept. Ara seemed happy in her new room, smaller but cozy. Joy stood in her empty living room looking around at the blank space. She said it felt like breathing for the first time in 15 years. I went back to work after 6 weeks of family leave. My coworkers knew something major had happened because the case was all over the local news. They didn't have names, but the details were specific enough that anyone who knew me could piece it together. People were supportive but curious, asking careful questions about how I was doing. I kept everything private, just saying my family had been dealing with a difficult situation that was now in the legal system. My boss called me into her office to check on me and make sure I could handle my workload. I promised I was ready to be back and needed the routine. She told me to speak up if I needed accommodations for my diabetes management. I started being more careful about my blood sugar, testing regularly, eating on schedule, not letting stress spike my levels. I set alarms on my phone to remind me to check my glucose and take my insulin. Work actually helped because it gave me structure and distraction from everything happening with Joy and Richard. Joy started going to a support group for domestic violence survivors that met twice a week at a community center. She was nervous the first time, convinced her situation was different because Richard had money and she'd had choices. But the other women welcomed her without judgment. She heard stories from women who'd been physically beaten, emotionally destroyed, financially controlled. One woman's husband had tried to kill her by tampering with her heart medication. Joy realized poisoning was just another form of partner violence. She came home from that first meeting looking shaken but less alone. Over the next few weeks, she kept going back, slowly opening up about her marriage. She told me about a woman named Sarah who'd escaped an abusive husband after 20 years. Sarah had helped Joy see that the plastic surgery and dieting weren't vanity. They were survival responses to Richard's criticism and affairs. Joy was still resistant to calling herself a victim. She kept saying she should have left sooner, should have seen the signs, should have protected Ara better, but the group helped her understand that abuse warps your thinking, makes you blame yourself for your abuser's choices. Victoria called Joy 6 weeks after Richard's arrest. Richard's lawyer wanted to propose a plea deal. He was offering to plead guilty to aggravated assault instead of attempted murder in exchange for 8 to 12 years in prison. Victoria explained this meant Richard would admit to poisoning Joy, but the charges would be reduced from trying to kill her to trying to seriously hurt her. The sentence would be shorter but guaranteed. Joy asked what would happen if they went to trial. Victoria said they had strong evidence and could potentially get a longer sentence if convicted of attempted murder. But trials were unpredictable. Juries were hard to read. There was always a chance Richard could be acquitted completely, especially with expensive lawyers creating reasonable doubt. The plea deal meant Richard would definitely serve significant time and officially admit guilt. Joy sat at my parents' kitchen table turning this over in her mind. She asked what I thought. I told her I couldn't make this decision for her, that both options had risks and benefits. Joy spent 3 days thinking about the plea deal. She talked to her therapist, to the women in her support group, to Victoria multiple times. Victoria laid out the possibilities clearly. A trial could result in Richard serving 20 years if convicted of attempted murder. But it could also result in him walking free if the jury believed his lawyer's arguments about vindictive wives and fabricated evidence. The plea guaranteed 8 years minimum, 12 years maximum, and Richard would have to allocate, which meant publicly stating what he did. Joy kept coming back to Ara. A trial would mean Ara might have to testify in open court, not just on video. It would mean months or years of continued legal proceedings, Richard's lawyers attacking Joy's character publicly, media coverage of every detail. Joy decided she couldn't put Ara through that. She called Victoria and said she wanted to accept the plea deal. She didn't want attempted murder on paper if it meant risking Richard going free or dragging Ara through a trial. Victoria said she understood and would notify the prosecutor and Richard's lawyer. The plea hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. I took the day off work to be there with Joy. My parents came too, sitting in the gallery behind us. Richard was brought in wearing an orange jumpsuit, looking even worse than at the preliminary hearing. His hair was completely gray now and he'd lost at least 30 pounds. He wouldn't look at Joy or me. His lawyer stood up and stated that Richard wished to enter a guilty plea to aggravated assault with intent to cause serious bodily harm. The judge asked Richard directly if he understood he was giving up his right to a trial. Richard said yes in a quiet voice. The judge asked if anyone had forced or coerced him into this plea. Richard said no. Then the judge asked Richard to allocate, to state in his own words what he had done. Richard stood there silent for a long moment. His lawyer whispered something to him. Finally, Richard said he had put insulin in his wife's protein shakes over a period of several months, knowing it would make her sick. He said he did it because he wanted to collect on her life insurance policy. The judge asked if he understood this had endangered her life. Richard said yes. Joy was crying quietly beside me, but she kept her eyes on Richard the whole time. The judge accepted the plea and moved to sentencing. He said Richard's actions were calculated, cruel, and targeted the person who should have been able to trust him most. He sentenced Richard to 12 years in state prison with no possibility of parole before serving 8 years. Richard's parents started crying in the back row. The bailiff led Richard away and he finally looked at Joy as he passed our table. She looked right back at him without flinching. The divorce papers arrived at Joy's apartment 8 weeks after the judge sentenced Richard. I was there when she opened the manila envelope, watching her hands shake as she pulled out the documents. The settlement gave her everything she'd asked for through Victoria. Full custody of Ara, with Richard only getting supervised visits. The house sale money, Richard's pension, and most of their savings. Richard kept his legal bills and the money he owed to the court for his crimes. Joy signed the papers at her kitchen table without saying a word, then put them back in the envelope and set it aside. She looked different somehow. Lighter, maybe. Like she'd been carrying something heavy and finally put it down. 3 weeks later, my parents invited Joy and Ara over for Sunday dinner. I got there early to help my mom cook, and when Joy walked in, I almost didn't recognize what I was seeing. She had a plate of food, actual normal portions of chicken and potatoes and green beans. Not lettuce, not tiny bites that she'd push around and barely eat. She sat down and ate everything on her plate, then had seconds. My mom caught my eye across the table and smiled. Joy had gained weight back, maybe 15 or 20 pounds, and she looked healthy instead of scary thin. Her face had color in it. She laughed at something my dad said and reached for a dinner roll without counting calories out loud or making comments about carbs. Ara sat next to her, chattering about her day at preschool, and Joy listened and ate and seemed present in a way I'd never seen before. After dinner, I helped clear the dishes, and Joy came into the kitchen behind me. She put her plate in the sink and turned to face me. She apologized again, but different this time, more specific. She brought up Thanksgiving and the things she'd said about my diabetes. She explained that she'd been projecting her own fear about food and her body onto me, that watching me exist without obsessing over every bite made her feel like she was doing everything wrong, so she attacked me for it. She said it didn't excuse what she said. Nothing could excuse that, but she wanted me to understand where it came from. I stood there holding a serving spoon, not sure what to say. She looked me in the eye and told me she was sorry for making my medical diagnosis about her toxic issues with food and control. I nodded and said I appreciated that, and I meant it. My mom came into the kitchen and put her arm around Joy's shoulders. They stood there together for a minute, and my mom said something quiet that I couldn't hear. Later, when Joy and Ara had gone home, my mom told me she'd always found Joy exhausting to be around. All the comments about appearance, the way she turned every conversation into a competition about who looked better or weighed less. But watching Joy fight to rebuild her life after everything with Richard made my mom feel real compassion for her. She said Joy was becoming someone genuine instead of performing all the time, and that person was actually enjoyable to spend time with. The next Saturday, I went over to Joy's apartment to watch Ara while Joy ran errands. Ara was playing with her dolls on the living room floor when she looked up at me and asked why Daddy didn't live with them anymore. I froze, not sure how to answer, but Joy had prepared me for this. Her therapist had given her specific guidance about how to talk to Ara in ways a 4-year-old could understand. Joy came home 20 minutes later and I told her what Ara had asked. She sat down on the floor with Ara and explained that Daddy had made some bad choices that hurt Mommy, so now Daddy lived somewhere else. Ara asked if Daddy still loved her, and Joy said yes. Daddy loved her very much, and she'd still get to see him sometimes. Ara seemed to accept this and went back to playing. Joy looked exhausted but calm. She'd been working with her therapist on this for weeks, practicing what to say. Ara seemed okay, actually. The apartment was quiet and stable, and Ara had adjusted to the new routine faster than anyone expected. Joy got a job the following month. She'd been applying to medical offices and clinics, using her experience managing the household finances and schedules as proof she could handle administrative work. A family practice downtown hired her as their receptionist. She called me the day she got the offer, her voice shaking with excitement and nerves. It was her first real job in 15 years, since before she married Richard. She started the following Monday, and I met her for lunch during her first week. She wore professional clothes that actually fit her new healthy body, and she couldn't stop smiling. She talked about learning the computer system and answering phones and how the doctors were patient with her while she figured everything out. She had her own paycheck coming, her own money that Richard couldn't control or take away. An identity beyond being someone's wife. 2 months later, Richard's first supervised visitation with Ara was scheduled. Joy called me the night before, panicking. I drove over and helped her pack Ara's bag with snacks and toys and a change of clothes. Joy kept second-guessing everything, asking if she should cancel, if Ara was ready, if this was a mistake. I reminded her what the therapist had said. Ara needed to maintain some relationship with her father, even after everything he'd done to Joy. The crimes were against Joy, not Ara. Richard had never hurt his daughter. Joy nodded but kept pacing around the apartment, checking the bag over and over. The next morning, I went with them to the visitation center. Joy's hands shook as she signed Ara in. A social worker came out and took Ara back to the visiting room. Joy and I sat in the waiting area for the full hour, not talking much. Joy stared at the door the whole time, her leg bouncing with anxiety. When the hour ended, the social worker brought Ara back out. Ara seemed confused about seeing Daddy in the strange room with the social worker watching, but she'd been happy to see him. She showed Joy a drawing Richard had helped her make. The social worker pulled Joy aside and gave her the report. Richard had been appropriate with Ara. He'd played with her, asked about school, told her he missed her. No concerning behavior, no attempts to talk badly about Joy or ask Ara inappropriate questions. Joy thanked the social worker and took Ara's hand. We walked out to the parking lot, and Joy cried in her car for 10 minutes before driving home. Not because it went badly, because it went fine, and that somehow made everything more complicated. After that, Joy and I started meeting for coffee every Tuesday morning. She'd drop Ara at preschool, and I'd meet her at the cafe near my office before work. We talked about real things. She asked about my diabetes management, actually listening when I explained about checking my blood sugar and counting carbs and adjusting my insulin. She didn't make it about weight or appearance. She asked how I felt, if the medication was working, if I was taking care of myself. I asked about her job and Ara and how therapy was going. She told me about learning to eat normally again, about how weird it felt to not count every calorie or feel guilty after meals. We talked about Richard sometimes, but mostly we talked about our lives moving forward. These coffee dates became something I looked forward to instead of dreaded family obligations. My diabetes started stabilizing around the same time. My blood sugar levels evened out as I got better at managing my medication and diet. The stress from everything with Joy and Richard had made my numbers unpredictable for months, but now that things had calmed down, my body responded better to treatment. My doctor was pleased with my progress at my checkup. I'd also joined a diabetes support group that met twice a month at the hospital. Sitting in a room with other people dealing with the same daily challenges made me feel less alone with my diagnosis. They understood the constant monitoring, the food calculations, the way people made assumptions about how you got diabetes. I shared my story about Joy's Thanksgiving comments, and everyone nodded like they'd heard similar things from their own families. Having that community helped more than I'd expected. Joy showed up at my apartment one evening about a month later with college brochures spread across her lap. She'd been researching community colleges and found one offering a social work program that would accept her old credits from 20 years ago. She wanted to finish the degree she'd abandoned when she married Richard. I helped her fill out the application that night, watching her hands shake as she wrote about why she wanted to study social work. She wrote about wanting to help other women recognize the signs she'd missed, about understanding how abuse hides behind wealth and perfect appearances. 2 weeks later, she got accepted and registered for 4 classes starting in January. Around the same time, Richard's parents started causing problems. They'd been quiet during the trial, sitting stone-faced in the courtroom, but now they wanted regular visits with Ara. Joy agreed to supervised visits at a neutral location, but Richard's mother kept telling Ara that Mommy had lied about Daddy, that he was a good man who made mistakes. Ara came home from one visit confused and upset, asking Joy if she'd told lies that made Daddy go away. Joy called Victoria immediately. Victoria drafted a cease and desist letter explaining that undermining Joy's custody through false information to a minor child would result in termination of grandparent visitation rights. The visit stopped after that, though Richard's parents sent angry letters claiming Joy was keeping their granddaughter from them out of spite. 6 months after Richard's sentencing, I met Joy for coffee and barely recognized her walking through the door. Not because she'd changed her appearance, though she'd stopped wearing the heavy makeup and had let her hair go back to its natural color. She looked different because she smiled when she saw me, a real smile that reached her eyes and made her whole face soften. She carried herself differently too, walking with her shoulders back but relaxed instead of that rigid posture she used to have. She'd gained some weight back to a healthy level and stopped obsessing over every bite of food. We talked about her classes, and she got excited describing her psychology course, gesturing with her hands and laughing at herself when she got too enthusiastic. This version of Joy felt like meeting someone new, or maybe meeting who she'd always been under all those years of performance and desperation. She met someone at her domestic violence support group a few weeks later. His name was Tom, and he was rebuilding his life after leaving his wife who'd been emotionally and financially abusive for 8 years. Joy mentioned him casually at first, just as someone who'd shared his story at group, but then she started talking about him more often. They'd gotten coffee after a meeting, then dinner the next week. She was cautious about it, telling me she wasn't ready for anything serious, and wasn't sure she'd ever trust anyone again. But I could tell she liked him by the way her voice changed when she talked about their conversations. He worked as a teacher and had 2 teenage kids he shared custody with. He didn't rush her or push for more than she wanted to give. They took things slowly, just spending time together and talking about their experiences and what they'd learned about themselves. I started dating someone around the same time, which felt weird to admit after spending so long focused on my diabetes and Joy's crisis. His name was James, and I met him at my diabetes support group. He had type 1 too, diagnosed when he was 12, so he understood the daily routine of checking blood sugar and calculating carbs and adjusting insulin doses. We started talking after meetings, then texting throughout the day about our numbers and what we were eating. Our first real date was at a restaurant where we both spent 10 minutes looking up nutritional information on our phones before ordering, then laughed at how ridiculous we must look. He never made my diabetes feel like a flaw or a burden. It was just part of who I was, like having brown hair or being left-handed. He saw me as a complete person instead of reducing me to my medical condition. Joy asked me one Tuesday morning if I wanted to volunteer with her at a domestic violence shelter downtown. They needed people to share their stories with women who were trying to leave abusive situations. I agreed, nervous about talking to strangers about everything that happened, but wanting to help if I could. We went together every other Saturday morning. Joy was incredibly good at it. She talked about how Richard's abuse had hidden behind their big house and expensive cars, how she'd thought having money meant she couldn't be a victim. She described the plastic surgery and dieting as attempts to be perfect enough to fix her marriage, not recognizing that the problem was never her appearance. Women in the shelter connected with her story because she looked put together and successful, proving that abuse doesn't only happen to people society expects to be victims. I mostly listened and answered questions when women asked about how I'd found the courage to speak up about Richard's affair. Ara started kindergarten in September, and her teacher reported she was doing great. She made friends easily and participated in class activities without any behavioral issues. Her therapist told Joy that Ara's resilience probably came from Joy's stability and honest communication. Joy never lied to Ara about what happened. She explained in age-appropriate terms that Daddy had hurt Mommy and needed to be away for a while to think about his choices. Ara asked questions sometimes, and Joy answered them truthfully without giving details a 5-year-old didn't need. The consistency of their routine and Joy's calm responses seemed to help Ara process everything without developing serious trauma responses. Richard sent Joy a letter from prison in October. She brought it to her therapy appointment unopened and read it with her therapist present. Richard wrote about being sorry for everything he'd done, claiming he was attending counseling in prison and working on his issues with control and anger. He asked Joy to consider bringing Ara to visit him because he missed his daughter and wanted to be part of her life. Joy read the whole thing without crying, then folded it back into the envelope. Her therapist asked what she wanted to do with it. Joy said she didn't want to respond. She was tired of Richard's narrative where he was the victim of his own problems, instead of someone who'd made deliberate choices to hurt her. She wanted to focus on her own healing instead of participating in his redemption story. She threw the letter away when she got home. My relationship with Joy changed completely during those months. We talked on the phone a few times a week and met for coffee or lunch regularly. She became someone I genuinely enjoyed spending time with instead of someone I tolerated out of family obligation. I saw glimpses of who she might have been if she'd never married Richard, or if she'd had the support to leave him years earlier. She was funny when she relaxed enough to joke around. She was thoughtful, asking real questions about my life and listening to the answers instead of waiting for her turn to talk. She was smart and passionate about her schoolwork and her volunteer work. Sometimes I looked at her and felt sad about all the years we'd lost to her toxic behavior, but mostly I felt grateful we'd found our way to this new relationship. Joy finished her first semester of college in December with straight A's. She called me from the parking lot after checking her final grades online, practically yelling with excitement. She'd been terrified of going back to the school after 20 years away, convinced she'd fail or look stupid compared to younger students. But she'd worked hard, studying every night after Ara went to bed, asking questions in class, meeting with professors during office hours. She'd earned those grades through genuine effort and intelligence. She framed her transcript and hung it on her bedroom wall, telling me it was the first thing she'd ever accomplished that was entirely hers. Not something she'd done to please Richard or prove something to other people. Just her own achievement based on her own abilities. I registered for the spring semester and scheduled my classes around Ara's school hours, so Joy and I could still trade off childcare. My endocrinologist gave me a progress report in January, showing my A1C had dropped significantly in just 6 months. She asked what I was doing differently, and I told her I'd stopped seeing diabetes as this horrible thing that ruined my life and started treating it like just another part of my daily routine. I checked my blood sugar before meals, counted my carbs, adjusted my insulin doses, and moved on with my day. The doctor said most newly diagnosed patients took years to reach the level of control I'd achieved, and she was genuinely impressed. I felt proud hearing that instead of broken or sick. My body was managing a hard thing really well, and that made me feel capable and strong for the first time since the diagnosis blindsided me last year. Joy called me in March asking if I wanted to come over for Thanksgiving planning. I thought she was joking because it was only March, but she explained she wanted to host this year and needed help figuring out a menu that worked for everyone. She'd been researching diabetic-friendly recipes and wanted my input on what would actually taste good versus what just looked healthy on paper. I drove to her apartment that weekend and found her kitchen table covered in cookbooks and printed recipes. She'd highlighted dozens of dishes and made notes about which ones Ara might eat and which ones would work with my carb counting. We spent 3 hours going through everything, and Joy never once mentioned calories or fat content or diet culture nonsense. She just wanted to make food people would enjoy eating together. We settled on a menu with regular options and modified versions I could eat safely, and Joy seemed genuinely excited about cooking for the family, instead of anxious about how everything looked. Thanksgiving arrived in November, obviously, and I helped Joy set up her small dining room table with mismatched chairs borrowed from my parents and her neighbor. The apartment smelled amazing from the turkey roasting and the diabetic-friendly pumpkin pie Joy had made using a recipe I'd found. Ara helped set the table, carefully placing napkins at each seat and chattering about the hand turkeys she'd made at the school. My parents arrived with wine and rolls, and we all squeezed around the table in Joy's cozy apartment. The meal was relaxed and genuinely pleasant in a way our family gatherings had never been before. Joy passed dishes without commenting on portion sizes, asked questions about everyone's lives without judgment, and actually laughed at my dad's terrible jokes instead of making everything tense. I ate the modified versions of stuffing and sweet potatoes she'd made for me, checked my blood sugar discreetly after the meal, and felt grateful instead of restricted. Joy noticed me testing and asked if the carb counts she'd calculated seemed accurate, showing real interest in helping me manage my health instead of weaponizing it. We made it through the entire day without a single comment about anyone's appearance or eating habits. And when I hugged Joy goodbye, I realized this was what family dinners were supposed to feel like all along. Joy got a letter in December informing her that Richard's parole hearing was scheduled for 6 years from now. She called me from her car after checking her mailbox, and I could hear the anxiety in her voice even though she was trying to sound calm. She said she knew it was years away, but she was already worried about him getting out early and trying to contact Ara or cause problems. I reminded her that Victoria had promised to help her prepare a statement opposing early release when the time came, and that 6 years was a long time for Richard to demonstrate whether he'd actually changed. Joy said she knew I was right, and then she surprised me by saying she was tired of letting Richard's existence dictate her emotional state. She wanted to focus on building a life where his presence or absence didn't define her happiness anymore. She said she had Ara and school and her job at the shelter and friends and family who actually cared about her. Richard was locked up and couldn't hurt her, and she was done giving him power over her feelings from behind bars. I told her I was proud of her for that perspective, and I meant it. Joy walked across the stage at her community college graduation in May, wearing a cap and gown she'd bought herself. Ara sat on my lap in the audience holding a sign she'd decorated with markers that said, "Go Mommy," with stars and hearts. My parents sat beside us taking photos and wiping tears as Joy accepted her associate degree in social work. The ceremony lasted 2 hours, and Joy's name was near the end alphabetically. But when they finally called her, she practically ran to get her diploma. She'd worked so hard for this, studying after Ara went to bed and writing papers during lunch breaks at her receptionist job. The degree represented 2 years of effort and determination, and proof that she could build a life on her own terms. After the ceremony, Joy found us in the crowd and hugged Ara first, then my parents, then me. She said she'd already applied to the domestic violence shelter where we'd been volunteering, and they'd called her that morning to offer her a full-time position as an intake coordinator. She started crying happy tears right there in the parking lot, and Ara asked why Mommy was sad. Joy picked up her daughter and said she wasn't sad at all. She was just really, really happy. Ara stopped asking about Richard as the months passed and the supervised visits became routine rather than traumatic. She'd see him once a month at the visitation center with a social worker present, and she'd come home talking about playing games or coloring pictures. But she never asked when Daddy was coming home, or seemed confused about why he didn't live with them anymore. Her primary attachment was clearly to Joy and their stable home and the life they'd built together. Ara had friends at the school and activities she loved, and a mother who was present and engaged instead of obsessed with her own appearance. Joy told me Ara's therapist said she was adjusting remarkably well and showed no signs of serious trauma from everything she'd witnessed. The consistency of their routine and Joy's calm responses seemed to help Ara process everything without developing lasting damage. Joy kept a folder of documentation about the visits and Richard's behavior just in case, but mostly she focused on giving Ara a childhood that felt safe and normal. My boss called me into her office in September and I thought I was in trouble for something. Instead, she offered me a promotion to senior analyst with a significant raise and expanded responsibilities. She said I'd been doing excellent work and showed strong leadership potential, and the company wanted to invest in my career development. I accepted immediately and called my partner on the way home to celebrate. We'd been dating for 8 months after meeting at my diabetes support group, and the relationship felt healthy and solid in ways I'd never experienced before. My partner understood the daily reality of managing chronic illness because they had their own health challenges, and we supported each other without making it weird or pitying. We talked about moving in together soon and building something long-term. I felt confident managing my diabetes while handling increased work responsibilities, and the promotion proved I could be successful and capable while dealing with a chronic condition. My disease didn't define me or limit me. It was just one part of my life that I managed alongside everything else. Joy and Tom got engaged in October after dating for a year. She called me squealing with excitement to show me the ring over video chat, and I'd never seen her this genuinely happy before. Tom was kind and patient and supportive of Joy's education and career, and treated Ara like she mattered. He'd been through his own divorce from an abusive marriage and understood Joy's trauma without making her feel broken or damaged. They'd taken the relationship slowly, building on friendship and mutual respect instead of rushing into intensity. Tom came to Ara's school events and helped Joy study for exams, and made dinner when she worked late at the shelter. He showed her what healthy partnership looked like, where both people supported each other's growth instead of one person controlling or diminishing the other. Joy said she'd never imagined feeling this secure and valued in a relationship, and watching her plan a wedding based on what she and Tom actually wanted, instead of what looked impressive to other people, made me happy for her. My parents took me to dinner in November to celebrate my promotion and just to spend time together. Over dessert, my father said they were proud of how I'd handled everything over the past 2 years. He said managing my diagnosis while protecting Joy and dealing with the legal chaos and maintaining my career showed real strength and character. My mother added that they were grateful I'd exposed Richard's affair despite the messy aftermath, because it likely saved Joy's life by revealing his poisoning before he succeeded. They said the whole experience had strengthened our family bonds significantly and brought us closer together. I told them I couldn't have managed any of it without their support, especially in those early months after diagnosis when I was struggling so hard. They'd reworked family meals and learned about carb counting and driven me to appointments and never made me feel like a burden. That foundation of support gave me the stability to help Joy when she needed it most. Joy and I met for coffee in December and ended up talking for 3 hours about everything that had happened since that terrible Thanksgiving 2 years ago. She brought up how I'd exposed Richard's affair and said she needed me to know something important. She said my revelation that night saved her life by exposing Richard's plans before he could finish poisoning her. If I hadn't said anything about the affair, Richard would have continued tampering with her protein shakes until she died or suffered permanent damage, and everyone would have thought it was just her obsessive dieting catching up with her. She said she knew I'd been carrying guilt about destroying her marriage and causing chaos, but I needed to stop because I'd actually rescued her from a man who was literally trying to kill her. I'd been telling myself for 2 years that I'd weaponized private information in a moment of anger, but hearing Joy say I'd saved her life finally let me believe it instead of just knowing it intellectually. We both cried in that coffee shop, and then we laughed about crying, and then Joy ordered us both pie because neither of us cared anymore about stupid food rules that had controlled so much of our lives. 2 years after that Thanksgiving, Joy texts me every morning with coffee shop recommendations and funny memes about surviving family holidays. We meet for lunch twice a month at different restaurants around town, trying new places and eating whatever we want without counting calories or judging portions. She sends me articles about diabetes management she finds interesting and asks genuine questions about my insulin routines. I share details about my relationship and career challenges, and she listens without offering unsolicited advice or criticism about my appearance. Ara started calling me her favorite aunt last spring during a family barbecue, wrapping her arms around my legs and announcing it loudly enough for everyone to hear. Joy smiled at me across the yard with real warmth in her eyes, not the fake performance smile from before. We've built something authentic between us, a relationship based on mutual support instead of comparison and competition. Life still throws challenges at both of us regularly. My blood sugar spikes unexpectedly sometimes, and I have bad days where managing diabetes feels overwhelming and exhausting. Joy struggles with anxiety about dating Tom, and worries she'll repeat old patterns from her marriage to Richard. Ara has nightmares occasionally about her father, and Joy calls me crying because she feels guilty about everything her daughter witnessed. But we handle these problems together now, texting back and forth during hard moments and showing up for each other when support matters most. Joy found herself beyond beauty standards and toxic marriage, discovering worth in her social work career and healthy relationship with Tom. I'm managing my diabetes confidently with stable A1C levels and genuine acceptance of my body exactly as it exists. We both learned that speaking truth, even when it's messy and complicated and destroys marriages and triggers criminal investigations, can ultimately save lives and heal relationships that seemed broken beyond repair.